Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today is my January wrap-up. So these are all of the books that I read in the month of January. This was a really good month for me. I read 7 books in total, 3 nonfiction and 4 fiction. So yeah, without further ado, here are the books I read this month. So to start, I'll do the nonfiction. Partially finishing up my master's at the start of the month, I read this book, The Struggle for Power in Syria, by Nicholas Van Dam. This is a cool kind of political economy book about the Syrian kind of political structure, especially kind of the role of sectarianism and how that influenced the military, the government, things like that. So this is a really helpful book for my master's. I don't have a physical copy, but the other book I read also for my master's was called Arend Fanon and Political Violence in Islam by Patricia Cesnal. This was a really good, quick read. I read it just in a day, about 2 kind of important philosophers, Hannah Arendt and Frantz Fanon, and they're kind of, the author kind of putting them in conversation and how they write about violence. And then the last nonfiction I read, purely for enjoyment, not for my master's, was The Rise and Fall of Dinosaurs by Steve Brissett. This was an awesome book. I loved this book. It was exactly what I needed, after a lot of nonfiction, for my studies. This was a really cool science book. It was a really cool history book. It was a kind of cool, I don't know, almost like memoir of the field of paleontology. Really interesting stories about some of the unique characters who were pioneers in the field of paleontology. So yeah, highly recommend this book. And then moving on to fiction. So yeah, I read 4 fiction books this month. I'm gonna try to keep that pace going for the year. At least for January to April, I wanna try to do 4 fiction books a month. Because then in April, I wanna do kind of NaNoWriMo boot camp, and these are some books that I wanna get in before that I think would be really helpful for me. So the first book I read of the year was one of my most anticipated. It was one I was looking forward to for a long, long time. And that is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. So this is the last book in Jade Legacy, in Fonda Lee's Greenbone saga. The first 2 were Jade City and Jade War. So I read those. Those were the first 2 books I actually read last year in 2021. And I was waiting all year to get this. And it came out, I think, in November or December. And then I got this beautiful special edition of the entire trilogy from Illumicrate. And yeah, so this is the first book I read. And it was awesome. Perfect ending to the story. Really emotional. There were a couple really, kind of heartbreaking moments there. But yeah, love this. If you haven't read this series, I highly recommend it. It quickly became one of my favorite fantasy series, probably of all time. So I really recommend the Greenbone saga. Then I read N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became. This was kind of a out of style for me, but I ended up loving it. This is kind of urban fantasy. It takes place in New York City. It's the start of a new trilogy N.K. Jemisin is doing called The Great Cities. And this one follows kind of the boroughs of New York as they all awaken in different avatars. So kind of there's, New York has these 6 souls, 5 for the boroughs and 1 for New York itself. And they're all represented in different people. And yeah, it's just this really cool concept of kind of these cities as they come to life. And it was this weird Lovecraftian horror about, the forces trying to stop that. This was really cool. And I thought it was a really fun kind of update on some of the Lovecraftian, eldritch horror stuff and their manifestations in kind of a modern 21st century New York. I don't want to spoil too much, so yeah, but I highly recommend this book. I've read 3 books by Jemisin so far, and this is definitely my favorite so far. Okay, and then I read Frank Herbert's Dune Messiah. So this was a reread for me. I read it when I was 14 or 15, right after I read the first Dune. I was not a fan of it that first time, but this time I really liked it. Upon reread much later, almost a decade later, I really liked this book this time around. Really cool kind of deconstruction of the first one, kind of deconstruction of, the hero myth and all that stuff. A lot smaller than Dune, much more kind of heady and philosophical, but I recommend this. I'm going to keep working through this series kind of bit by bit. And then the last book I read, I just finished this a day or two ago, was R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War. So I've been wanting to get to this book for a long time, and I've actually done a review for this book. It's my first review ever, so my apologies if it's not the most nuanced or exciting review. But yeah, I just did a review for this. I don't know which video is going to come out first, this review or this January recap. But yeah, check that review out once it's out. Long story short, I really like this book. It's really, really dark and brutal and violent. So please look up, warnings ahead of time. But I thought this was a really well written examination of real life history through a fantastical lens. So I'm really excited to continue on with this series. The Dragon Republic is next, and then The Burning God. So yeah, that was my January. 7 books in total. I'm gonna aim for about the same next month, 7 to maybe even 8. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, thanks for checking in.